Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Not sure if anyone here has heard of Glimmer people, but I've seen a few stories of them. They're kind of like shimmering entities that resemble the predator alien when it's using its cloaking ability. Pick-related. Here's one guy talking about it. He was a University of Florida student who was out hiking with his dog, Toby, on the Gainesville-Hawthorne State Trail. It was a weekday around 11 a.m., so there were very few people, just me and Toby. All of a sudden, Toby froze. He just stood there with his ears perked up, tail sticking straight out. He was staring into the trees like he saw something. So I asked him, "What do you see, Toby? What is it, boy?" At this point, Toby's demeanor started to change. He began to whimper and started pulling on the leash like he wanted out of there. I continued to look into the trees, trying to spot whatever was scaring him. And that's when I saw it. It's very hard to describe, but this thing looked translucent, but not quite. It was in the shape of a human, but it was see-through. The thing that stood out the most was the glowing yellow eyes. That was the only thing that wasn't clear. As crazy as it sounds, this thing looked like the alien in the Predator movies. It was standing on a large tree branch hanging on by its right arm and was looking directly at me and Toby. It slowly began to crouch down and tried to hide behind the trunk of the tree, like it noticed us noticing him. I was mesmerized by this thing. I was just staring at it, trying to figure out what it was. I didn't want to take my eyes off of it in fear that I might lose sight of it. This thing was so damn camouflage. If I looked away, I might not be able to find it again. Then it moved. It swung through the trees effortlessly and made almost no sound. It would move a few trees away and then freeze, looking back at us. I guess it was trying to determine if we were watching it or not. I got the feeling this thing did not want to be seen. It would move, then freeze, crouch down and put itself between us and the tree it was in. It would sit there for a few minutes and then move again. I wanted to follow it, but everything in my body said not to. So I just watched it, and it eventually disappeared into the forest. Toby and I jogged back to the car, and I never told anyone about what we saw. To this day, I don't know what I witnessed. Was it an alien or something? I don't know. I was scared the day it happened, but at the same time, I was excited to see something like that. Toby and I went back there numerous times, and I'm not going to lie, I hoped to see it again, but I never did. I thought that I was the only one who had this type of encounter, until I heard people talking about the Glimmer Man. Well, I saw it, and now I tell anyone who will listen. Of course, some people think I'm crazy, but I don't care.
I always liked hearing ghost stories as a kid, but never found them scary as I firmly believed that such things did not exist. This view changed during my high school freshman year in the early 1990s, when I was living in Montclair, California, which is in San Bernardino County, about a half-hour drive east from Los Angeles. So not some rural or remote area. The house I lived in was about a 10-minute walk from the high school, so each day my mom would take my sisters to school on her way to work and pick them up on her way home. This meant I had the entire house to myself from about 7 a.m. to about 6 p.m. This incident took place in the afternoon after school let out, around 3:30 p.m. or 4 p.m. So not in the dead of night when the eyes can play tricks. The house had no dishwasher, just a double basin sink and a drying rack. So I did dishes by filling one side of the sink with hot soapy water and using the other side for rinsing. Being Southern California was literally a desert before the city was built there. We were going through our regularly scheduled California droughts, and everyone had to do their part to save water. For me, this meant filling the hot water side of the sink only about a third of the way, maybe 4 inches or so, and laying the drinking glasses on their sides so they could be completely submerged. I also pulled out and scrubbed every dish before turning on the water to rinse anything. So on this particular afternoon, I was washing glasses and had a few on the left side soaking and 2 on the right side waiting to be rinsed. I grabbed and started scrubbing a third glass when I saw it. Like most houses, there was a kitchen window right above the sink, and this one gave a view into the backyard. My hands were sort of on autopilot as I had been doing dishes by hand for years, and I was just staring mindlessly out the window. What I saw looked like the faint outline of a person, maybe 5 feet tall, walking through the yard. It immediately made me think of the movie Predator, as this thing had a head, shoulders, and torso. The legs were a bit harder to see just from the angle of how I was looking through it, but I didn't believe it was an entity of any sort. I guessed that there was a length of fishing line caught in the wind or hanging from a helium balloon or kite that just happened to be blown into this shape by the wind. Except it maintained the same shape and wasn't moving like it was being blown. It seemed to be moving against what wind there was. It then went under the overhanging branches of a large tree and just sort of stopped there. I was now completely at a loss for what it could be as I stared at it. Presumably, it was also watching me as well. It seemed to be swaying back and forth like a person shifting their weight from one foot to another. I started drying off my hands so I could go out the back door to get a better look at it. It suddenly took off toward the corner of the house and out of sight from the kitchen window. I quickly went to the back door so I could catch whatever it was before it was gone, but a loud, hollow thump sound stopped me. It sounded like something had fallen or collapsed inside the house. I left the back door and went looking room by room for what happened. I found something amiss when I got to my bedroom. My closet door was open. I have an almost OCD habit of keeping drawers, cabinets, and closets closed, and a shoebox of trinkets that I kept on the top shelf of the closet was in the middle of the room, open and all the stuff inside arranged in a circle around the box. However, I ignored this for a moment to look out my bedroom window, as when I lost sight of the invisible man, it would have been right outside that window. I didn't see anything. I picked up the items, put them back in the shoebox, and placed them back on the shelf where they had been. My mind started trying to figure out how it got on the ground to begin with, as it wasn't on the floor in front of the closet, but a few feet away and off at an angle in the middle of the room. I also wondered how it could have hit the ground just right to have everything in it splash out in a circle and not just dump out in a pile. But I set that thought aside and went back to the back door to see if whatever I had seen earlier was still around. I stopped dead in my tracks walking through the kitchen, because the glasses I had scrubbed were back in the left basin. The basin itself no longer had water in it, but the plug was still in place and the glasses that had been on their side, along with the two that had been taken from the right basin, were now upright, filled completely with water, and arranged in a circle in the sink around the drain. This was not something that could happen by accident. It was a deliberate act, which meant there was someone in the house. I reached under the kitchen sink and grabbed a big heavy pipe wrench for protection. I then went to the back door to find it locked, the deadbolt locked, and the security latch locked. I went to the front door and it also had all 3 locks secure. I then checked all the windows in the house looking for a break-in and half expecting to see our idiot drug-dealing neighbor rummaging through our stuff. However, all the windows were closed, intact and latched. I checked under beds, in closets, and even the crawl space storage area, but found nothing. The whole time I was announcing myself, saying things like, "Whoever you are, you better come out and show yourself right now." But nobody came out because nobody was there. I was understandably frightened, but once I had cleared the house and found nothing, I was more confused than scared. I grabbed the cordless phone and stuck it in my back pocket, thinking I would call 911 once I found a broken window or intruder. I was getting ready to call 911 anyway, but was suddenly struck with the realization that I didn't know what I was going to report. Someone broke into my house, moved dishes around, and left locking everything from the inside somehow behind them. I went back to look at my closet and look at the sink, trying to find some sort of explanation other than another person in the house. I had temporarily forgotten the thing I saw in the backyard, but remembered when I was retracing my steps. Could whatever it was in the backyard be linked to the things happening inside the house mere moments later? That seemed impossible. The idea that some sort of entity walking through the backyard came into the house and did this was completely ludicrous, but it was also the only explanation that I could find, even though I really didn't want to believe it. Because that would mean such beings really do exist, and everything I thought I knew about science was wrong.
This happened about 15 years ago in central Arkansas. For those unfamiliar with the general layout, there is little rock, and then a lot of trees surrounding various cities outside of it. My cousin lived in a log house located in one of those areas, aka the middle of the woods. He was around 11 and I was around 13. We were alone at his house and jumping on his trampoline while talking and playing when I had this really weird feeling I was being watched. It wasn't a completely uncommon feeling, but I always stopped what I was doing and looked around when it would happen. The first thing I noticed was my cousin's face. He had stopped jumping and was blankly staring into the woods with his mouth open. I quickly looked in the same direction and saw an outline of something moving slowly through the woods. When I say outline, I mean it literally. It was invisible, like a shimmer slowly moving through the trees with a very clear humanoid outline. I slowly nudged him to the edge of the trampoline without taking my eyes off it before we both jumped and took off to the house. We locked every door and window before talking about it. When I asked him what he saw, he said it looked like a person, but he could see through them. We called his mum, and she had a police officer show up and scan the surrounding area, thinking it was just a hunter in their woods or something. They didn't find anybody, and chalked it up to kids getting spooked by a noise in the woods. I still have no idea what that thing was, but we still talk about it after a few drinks.
The date of my first encounter was July 14th, 2018, 2 days after my birthday. At the time, my girlfriend and I were living with my parents in their old 2-story brick house. Our room was upstairs. It was around 10 or 11 p.m. at night, and my girlfriend and I were laying in bed. Nothing out of the ordinary was going on, just a typical night, just chilling out in bed. First of all, let me mention I'm a grown man. Yes, I still live at my mom's house as a grown man. I don't get scared easily. I'm not afraid of the dark or the boogeyman, but this night is going to test my scaredness. I never even imagined in a million years something like this would ever happen. It was the furthest thing from my mind. We were lying in bed and my girlfriend had to go downstairs to use the bathroom or something. Mind you, the bedroom light is on. I'm lying in bed. The TV isn't on. Haven't watched it at all that day. But all of a sudden, this is how I'm going to describe it as close as I can. Well, all of a sudden it feels like my bed is almost shaking or vibrating. In a sense, I do not understand what is happening. I start looking around, but as soon as I turn my head to the right, I can see plain as day a silhouette of a human shape. But this human shape figure you could see straight through. It kind of looked like heat waves, but in the distinct shape of a human. No mistake about it. Okay, let me pause and do a recap. I came to realize that the bed shaking or vibrating was actually me trembling out of the fear way before I even saw anything. It's like my gut feeling was in tune trying to warn me. Back to me seeing the human shape see-through figure. I was just stuck in a stare or gaze of awe when suddenly I watched it walk to the foot of the bed, all the way right to my side of the bed. And in a split second my conscience said, "Get the fuck up now and run." So I jumped up and I swear I don't even remember walking down the stairs. I was gone that fast. Now mind you, my mom, my dad, my sister, and my girlfriend are all right there in the dining room when I bolt through the downstairs door. They looked at me and said, "What's wrong? You are as pale as a ghost." I kind of didn't want to say anything to them because let's be honest, what if I told you that I saw a clear person? How the hell are you going to react? But this is the weird part, we don't mention this to anyone. About a week later, give or take, my niece comes over. She is 10 at the time and likes riding the 4-wheeler trike. So she rides it for a little bit shorter than her usual ride and she comes in and she is pale as a ghost and we ask her what is wrong. What happened? She says, "Please don't think I'm stupid, but I saw an invisible person chasing me on the 4-wheelers. It had a grown-up body, but it was invisible. It didn't have any facial features. All you could see was just the shape or outline of a human-like body." I instantly got chills over my body. Well, I told her I knew exactly what she had seen because I had a similar experience a week before. I told her, "You're not crazy, it is real. I don't know what it is, but I saw it too. I have one more encounter with the same invisible shape being 4 years later. I want to say the same one, but definitely the same invisible shape entity."
I've been wanting to tell someone about the incidents that have occurred sporadically throughout my life, but have always felt afraid of being ridiculed or worse. So I wanted to share my experiences when I lived in New Mexico from 2015 to 2017. My then husband was in the military stationed at Holloman Air Force Base. The base is situated a few miles from White Sands Missile Range, and of course, the Trinity site. Then I was a gym fanatic, and spent most of my days working out. By late evening, my husband arrived home, and he would often accompany me to the running track at the furthest end of the base, only separated from the flight line by about half a mile of open desert. One particular night after having finished my run, I spotted an odd movement in the desert area separating the track from the flight line. It looked like a large see-through object was walking between the desert plants. The bushes behind that see-through entity were visible but looked distorted, and this thing was making its way towards the track. I stood there looking at it, trying to figure out what it was, and comparing that patch of desert with the rest. It just didn't make sense in my mind. I could not wrap my head around what I was seeing. My husband came up running and said, "Don't look at it, just keep walking." We jogged back home and I asked him if he had seen it. He said yes he had, but didn't want to talk about it. On another instance, I was alone at home as my husband was on temporary duty travel, and I opened the bedroom blinds to look at the red-winged blackbirds I'd left food for the previous night, and one of those see-through things was standing right outside. It just stood there. This was broad daylight, unlike the first time, and it creeped me out way worse because it clearly didn't show any fear of being seen. It was tall, but not to the point that I would think it couldn't possibly be human. Yes, it was see-through, but its outline and its shape could still be made out, because as it moved, the area it was reflecting from behind looked odd, like cling wrap that had some folds. It didn't try to enter the house, and I didn't try to go outside. It just stood there for a while, and eventually left, I guess, because I closed the blinds and pretended not to see it. Pretending something didn't happen has been my go-to mechanism for dealing with such oddities. I didn't know what else to do. As years passed and I divorced, my ex's attitude about that night changed completely. He said there was nothing there, and he denied having seen other weird things during the time we lived there, which was total BS because weird things happened there constantly. Sometimes I wonder if that see-through person was just military tech being tested around the base. Anyway, that's all I wanted to share today. And though I have mentioned this story to my siblings and my current partner, they can't seem to comprehend, or they just simply think I'm making it up. But I know what I saw.
I live near Greensboro, North Carolina. The date that the incidents began was June 18, 2022. 2 weeks after moving to this address, I witnessed trees in the park behind my home, moving as though there was a huge, heavy being moving from one tree to the other. But I could not see any visible being, though I know that this movement was not caused by the wind. Since then, I have seen a variety of strange, unreal things that I would never have imagined ever seeing in real life except in sci-fi films. I have tried to take photographs of these anomalies, but nothing is ever captured. I've used a digital camera and an old Polaroid, but to no avail. There is something outside in my trees, and it is not squirrels. I can feel them watching me and have seen their neon green eyes staring back at me from inside of the thick tree cover, where they try to hide and blend in with the leaves on the top of the trees. Something is definitely wrong here, and it really has me frightened. I know something has come into my home and assaulted me with scratches on my back and left a blood-red scab at the base of my skull. It was as though it was punctured with a sharp object such as a needle. I'm convinced that the government and other officials in this community know about the activity. I collected some hair evidence that I know is not human. The hair is too thin and wispy, and the color is greenish in hue. I don't know what to do. Someone suggested I reach out to the government so I won't lose my sanity. I never, in my wildest dreams, would have ever imagined these things to actually be real. It's difficult for me to accept the reality of it.
I wanted to share my account regarding a predator-like being. It was sometime around 2006 or 2007, and my kids and my friends were having a campfire in the yard right outside our home. We live outside of our town and have wooded areas all around us, on the edge of the Adirondack Mountains in New York. Off the deck of the house was a fire ring with a small above-ground pool. Next to that, our property is lined with white pine trees, which are quite big and very branchy. The woods behind the pool go back quite a ways, and the pine trees are continuous to the woods. I had just brought out marshmallows for the fire and sat in a chair with my back to the side of the property with the trees leading to the woods. To my right, it was light out, and I sat listening to the chatter from the kids while gazing into the woods trying to relax. There was no wind or breeze, and it was a very quiet night. I noticed a movement in the trees to my right, up in the branches that were just behind the pool. I stared at the area because I saw something move, but nothing was there. As I stared, I started to see some kind of movement, but it was like the branches and pine needles moved instead of an animal or being which didn't make sense. I watched for about a minute when the movement leaped, for lack of a better word, to the next tree that was closer to us. There was no noise and no swaying of branches like one would expect if there was weight on the tree. As I watched, I noticed that I was seeing pixels, like in a digital picture, moving. I made out the shape of something that had arms and legs and a head, but not quite human-like. This shape was hunched down on the branch with one arm holding the tree trunk. The legs bent like it was squatting, and it felt like we were being watched even though I could see no face or any other description. It was just pixelated movements in the shape of a being. It had moved closer to us and was in the tree on our side of the pool now. When I realized how close it was, I told the kids it was time to go inside. They fussed a bit, but I insisted they go inside. Right then, my son saw me looking up in the trees and asked what I was looking at, and of course told him that it was nothing. I did not take my eyes off the shape, and as soon as the kids got out and moved up and moved toward the deck to go inside, the shape moved from the branch. It was moving back to the tree where I first noticed it. The movement was so fast, so effortless, and so silent that I got scared. Then it vanished into the woods, moving from tree limb to tree limb, and was gone in a matter of seconds. Nothing. I know of no creature that can move like that, and I know of nothing that fits that description. I've never seen it again, and we still live in the same house. We all have eerie feelings about the woods behind the house, and that feeling remains with us to this day. Anytime we walk through the wooded area, we have sections of the woods that we do not venture into for no apparent reason, except for that uneasy feeling we all get.
I grew up in western New York near Rochester, not too far from the Canadian border. My dad built a mini mansion that backed up to the Forever Wild Woods. That's the New York State program that keeps the wilderness as is. Once the house was built, the woods became the playhouse for myself and my closest friend, DJ. It is the early 1990s, and we love being outside. One day, while exploring, we found an amazing section about 50 minutes walk into the woods that was a gorgeous swamp full of flowers and life. I remember approaching it. There were snapped trees all around and straight branches jammed into the ground like spikes. The solid land went into the swamp like a peninsula. The trees were almost like walls on each side that funneled us out onto it. We approached the water and saw snapping turtles quickly submerged. Being kids, we started skipping rocks and throwing boulders to get splashes, just doing what kids do. Then out of nowhere, DJ and I felt a wave of fear, sort of a sixth sense. Our hair stood up. We were both looking around for what triggered this primal feeling. DJ pointed to a tree across the water, and I can only describe it as if the top half was bending back and forth, not like the wind was gently pushing it, but like it was close to snapping. Left, then right, back and forth. It was bending, creaking loud, over and over, quicker and quicker. The bottom of the tree barely moved. Then out of nowhere, there was this rumbling growl that was so loud it shook our insides. I've been around loud things before and even learned to shoot an 8-gauge black powder shotgun. No sound compared to the force of this. Picture your soul getting pushed out your back and then springing back inside like a giant invisible rubber band. In the pierced silence of this, we both ran for our effing lives. The whole way home we ran through bushes and branches, ripping up our exposed skin. We both thought we could hear pursuit all around us, but said nothing. Once home, we tried sharing what happened with my parents, but they wouldn't listen. We decided to stay inside for the rest of the day. As usual, DJ was spending the night, and we decided to crash in the support, a 25 by 25-foot room filled with double-hung windows on 2 exterior walls, a sliding glass door that led to a 3-story deck, and a French door that led to a formal living room. Dad had worked hard. He went from a garbage man to a business owner, so this house was massive. Anyway, DJ was on the couch while I lay on the floor in front of the TV with a Nintendo. It was summer, so all the double-hung windows were opened wide. I stretched out with my arms behind my head, my neck on a couple of pillows, and my fingers were interlaced. My hands were sort of folding up the back of my head with elbows flared out. DJ was out and snoring, and I was half asleep watching something on the TV. As God is my witness, out of nowhere I felt a massive hand engulf both my hands and part of my wrist, and pull me toward the windows. I moved a good 2-3 feet and effing lost it, screaming in terror. It released me, and within a minute my dad ran in. DJ was silent and just staring at me. I told my dad what happened. So he went to each window and said the screens were all slid down and in place. He said that it was just a dream, for me to man up and shut up. I shut up and prayed he'd just go back out. I looked at DJ and asked him if he had seen it. He just looked at me and didn't say anything about it. He ended up calling his parents and getting picked up in the middle of the night. I went upstairs and tried to sleep in my room. The next day, I called DJ's house to see if he wanted to come over, and his mom said he didn't feel good, and to not call again until I heard from him. This confused my 12-year-old mind. We never got together again after that. I'd see him occasionally. He was cold with me every time. Eventually, at the end of summer, I ran into him on the canal path, one of our fishing spots, and decided to question him. His mom wasn't there to be the buffer. He finally confessed that on that night, for some reason, he awoke and saw a predator grab and pull me. He didn't use that specific word. Instead, he described a massive, clear but distorted shimmer thing that reached in and grabbed me. I never knew others had seen this cloak of invisibility. I now refer to it as a predator. Did it lift the screen up, slide easily enough, and then close it that quick? Did it somehow pass through the fiberglass mesh? I just don't know. I looked in the morning but saw no tracks, and DJ thought it was a ghost. I didn't put it all together until much later, as an adult. I think it followed me home after we trespassed on its turf. It could have hurt us easily at any time, but it didn't. I almost think it had a sick type of humor and enjoyed terrifying us a little bit. I never went that far back in the woods after that.
My mom and I traveled to Oxford, Ohio, for a long weekend stay in a secluded cabin near Houston Woods State Park that forever changed our perception of reality. The owner had remodeled the cabin several months before. The cabin was built into the side of a hill, with a garage constructed underneath. The cabin was equipped with a screened deck that from the outside looked as though it was off a second floor, but actually, it was off the main floor of the residence. The deck held a table and chairs, as well as a generously sized hot tub. The way the deck is lifted, we had a beautiful view. I turned the jacuzzi on to get warmed up and ready for us to enjoy. I was in the hot tub while my mother was sitting at the table. My mom held her finger up and said, "Do you hear that?" I didn't hear anything over the bubbling water. Mom used her phone light to look around and didn't see anything in the dark of the night. A few minutes later, I got out and dried off sitting at the table with my mom to drink some hot cocoa. Mom seemed a little anxious and was looking around nervously. I asked her what was wrong. She shook her head, saying the forest sounds just kind of stopped. "Oh my gosh, you're right," I replied, as I realized I no longer heard the crickets and frogs chirping. After an hour or so, we decided to go to bed. The next day, we decided to explore the area around the cabin and noticed the ground was damp from an overnight shower. We walked about 100 feet or so away from the cabin, and Mom noticed 2 strange footprints having 3 toes. She pointed it out to me. They were a couple feet away from each other. We spent another hour looking around and then headed back for lunch. That night, as we enjoyed the hot tub, we heard a loud screeching scream come from somewhere outside the cabin. I jumped up and turned out the light on the deck so we couldn't be seen, and we would have a better view outside. Mom shut off the hot tub so we could hear better as well. Soon we heard branches breaking and other movements, but the strangest part was that the sounds were coming from the forest canopy, not from the ground. It sounded as if something heavy was climbing a tree not far from the cabin. We both stood back against the wall close to the door that goes inside. We could hear something really big, but couldn't see anything. As we were getting ready to go inside, we saw a set of yellow glowing eyes looking at us from a branch level with a deck, about 30 feet away. We ran inside and slammed the door, praying we were safe. Not sure if we should call someone, we decided to sit inside after making sure the doors were all locked. We stayed up for another hour and didn't hear anything else, so we went to bed. The next morning after breakfast, we went outside to look around the cabin where we thought the noises were coming from. Other than a few large branches lying on the trail, we didn't see anything out of the ordinary. We decided to go on with our day and drove over to the lake after some more sightseeing and dinner. We went back to the cabin and went out to the deck and played cards over coffee. It was dusk, so we could still see a fair distance. As we were talking, Mom noticed everything had gone quiet again. She asked me if I noticed the nature sounds had stopped. I listened and realized Mom was right. Soon the sound of branches breaking started again, and this time was moving closer to the cabin. Turning out the light and watching the trees as the noises got closer, we were shocked at what we saw. The branches were moving as if something large was on them, but it didn't look like anything was there. But then we got a glimpse of what we had been hearing. In the trees was what looked like a large human shape, but it was nearly invisible. It looked like a moving heat wave shaped like a tall person. We watched in disbelief as the large entity moved through the trees. We didn't want to move so it wouldn't see us, not knowing its intentions. After a few minutes, it had moved away from our location. We waited a couple minutes after not hearing anything and stepped inside. We discussed leaving that night instead of in the morning, but it was getting late, and once we packed everything up, it would be dark, so we decided to stay till morning. We gathered all of our belongings so everything would be ready, come morning, and went to bed. I awoke to use the bathroom around 4 a.m. As I was on my way back to bed, I heard what sounded like loud footsteps. Still being kind of groggy, I was trying to decipher where the sounds were coming from when I realized they were coming from the roof. I ran in and woke Mommy up, whispering what I had heard. We sat on the couch quietly praying and talking until morning light, when I peeked outside after not doing anything for some time. I saw nothing around, so we quickly grabbed our belongings and put them into the car. As we were getting into the car, I saw a dirty, three-toed print on the hood of the car. As I drove away, I looked toward the back of the cabin and saw the creature's yellow eyes staring back. I drove away as quickly as safely possible.
Around 1994, I was living near Nashville, Tennessee, in a small neighborhood called Antioch. This is in Davidson County. I was out walking my dog one day, letting the dog do its business out in the front yard, when I could sense something was watching me. It was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and everyone around there was at work except me. I could just feel something watching me. I started looking at the woods directly in front of me. I couldn't see anything, but I did hear leaves rustling in the trees. So I started looking up towards the tops of the trees. The only way I could describe it, and I don't even know if the movie had come out yet, was the cloaked alien in the Predator film. In the movie, they saw that invisible creature where you could see the outline of everything, but you can see right through it. It was sitting up in the very tops of the trees where it wouldn't hold the weight of a man by any means. This thing was as big as a man. I just stood there looking at it when I saw a quick flash of its eyes. It was a sudden bright yellow glow. I let go of the leash and I took off on a dead run towards this thing. It literally started running across the tops of the trees. I know what I saw. While running, I thought about what I was doing. I then thought, what in the world are you doing chasing this thing? I stopped, and it stopped. About a length of a football field away from where it started. It turned around and looked at me again with the flashing yellow eyes, and then it took off through the woods, through the tops of the trees, out into the deeper woods. I didn't see it again. It scared the hell out of me. I never ever told anybody about it because I thought people would think I was crazy.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check the Odyssey and Rumble pages for separate archives of previous broadcasts.